The house was a sepulchre. Our fear and suffering lay buried in the ruins. There would be no resurrection. When I thought of Manderley in my waking hours, I would not be bitter. I should think of it as it might have been, could I have lived there without fear. I should remember the rose garden in summer, and the birds that sang at dawn, tea under the chestnut tree, and the murmur of the sea coming up to us from the lawns below. I would think of the blown lilac and the happy valley. These things were permanent. They could not be dissolved. They were memories that cannot hurt. All this I resolved in my dream, while the clouds lay across the face of the moon, for like most sleepers, I knew that I dreamed. In reality, I lay many 100 miles away, in an alien land, and would wake before many seconds had passed, in the bare little hotel bedroom, comforting in its very lack of atmosphere. I would sigh a moment, stretch myself and turn, and opening my eyes, be bewildered at the glittering sun, that hard, clean sky, so different from the soft moonlight of my dream. The day would lie before us both, long, no doubt, and uneventful, but fraught with a certain stillness, a dear tranquillity we had not known before. We would not talk of Manderley. I would not tell my dream, for Manderley was ours no longer. Manderley was no more. That is from this mysterious book, Rebecca, by Daphne Du Maurier. Yes, Rebecca, the mysterious story that tells the tragic tale of Maxim de Winter, lonely rich guy whose wife has passed away, but he meets a young woman, our narrator, and they fall in love in about 5 minutes. At least she falls head over heels with this guy. And he takes her home to his estate, Manderley. There, our young narrator learns about Rebecca, his first wife, who died mysteriously in a boat accident. Yeah, sure she did. Now, you know right away, things are not what they seem. In fact, the little bit that I read you might think that that's a spoiler for what happens in this story, but trust me, that it's not. That happens on page 4. In the very beginning of this book, you learn that Manderley, the estate, is no more. It is theirs no longer. And our narrator is a young woman, a naive young woman of a much lower class than her new husband. She and her husband are pretty much expatriates. They're not in England anymore. So what happened to Manderley? What happened to these people? Why aren't they in England? You learn a bit in the beginning, but it just gives you more questions. You have to read the book to find out what the heck happened. And boy, a lot happens in this book. I have seen this book described. I've actually seen this book in lists of the best horror novels. So it has been described by some, at least, as a horror novel. It's not. It's not a horror novel. It's a lot of other things, though. It is a mystery story. It's a crime story. It's a really classic story. This came out in the late 30s, I believe. But it really feels, when you read this, if you've ever watched Downton Abbey, you get a lot of Downton Abbey vibes in this. It's just an excellent story. Really keeps you guessing about certain things. Other things, you guess right away. The big mystery, of course, in this story is what happened to Maxim de Winter's first wife, Rebecca. Now, our narrator, she never gets a name. She is the nameless narrator, uh, which is kind of the opposite of Rebecca, who we never see because she's gone, but we hear her name all the time. So what happened to Rebecca? That is the mystery, because when she gets to Manderley, everybody's talking about Rebecca all the time. All the servants are talking about Rebecca, and she meets the dastardly Mrs. Danvers, who pretty much runs this place. She runs Manderley. And she loved Rebecca and doesn't like the new wife quite so much. Doesn't like her at all, in fact. And she's really creepy, Mrs. Danvers. So you know right away that she's the villain, right? Or one of them. Great character, Mrs. Danvers. I could have used even more of her in this book than we got. Fantastic characters in this. The writing in this is beautiful. Just wonderful prose throughout the whole thing. It's just a pleasure to read. It's one of those books that even if it wasn't about something interesting, it would be a pleasure to read, because boy, Daphne Du Maurier, she could write. As far as her story goes, really entertaining story, really gripping story. It is true that some of the things that are supposed to be mysterious are pretty easy to predict. I read this in a along with Revenant Reads and Mark from Book Time with Elvis. We had a good time talking about this book as we read along. We both read it at a pretty even pace. We kept up with each other pretty good for the most part. And I think we all felt kind of the same way about it. Revenant Reads, Mark and I, and that we could guess a lot of the twists that were coming. They weren't big surprises, a lot of them. There were a couple surprises, but a lot of them we kind of saw coming. But it almost didn't matter because the book was just that good. At least I felt it was. I'm definitely going to read more work by Daphne Du Maurier. This was a cool place to start, though. This is probably her most famous book. Justifiably so, I think. It's interesting what a great character Rebecca turns out to be, and we never really meet her. She's only ever talked about by other people. And, of course, what does happen? What does happen to Rebecca? You know, was it just a boat accident? Of course it wasn't. It couldn't be, right? Something else had to have been going on. Maybe. It's interesting. It's really cool to go along with our unnamed narrator on this ride and learn the secrets as they happen. Our narrator does get a little annoying at times because she is just so meek and shy, and she's of a lower social class, so she's really not used to, she's not used to being the mistress of this great estate. She doesn't know what to do. She's uncomfortable. And that goes on a bit too long. It gets to the point where it's like, you know what? This place is your house already. Get over it. But still, despite that, she's kind of likable too. And there's a sense of authenticity to the character. I get the feeling that Daphne Du Maurier was a bit like our narrator. Our narrator, for example, is always imagining scenarios, and just her brain is always going off on tangents, and she's always imagining what other people are talking about or what other people might be thinking. And I think that comes straight from Daphne Du Maurier. I think that's her imagination, and she puts that imagination into her main character. That works really, really well, even if at times the character becomes really annoying. But as a counterpoint to that character, we have Mrs. Danvers, the the woman who pretty much runs this estate and just loved Rebecca. She just loved Rebecca. And villainous, and we know that right away. Great character. I love Mrs. Danvers. And Maxim De Winter is kind of an entertaining character too. She instills life in all of her characters. A lot of life, a lot of personality. And the personality of the setting as well, Manderley, is just such a perfectly realized location. I walked away from this book feeling like I had visited that place. It is so beautifully described. And just the sense of the place was so well done. Excellent, excellent work. So, Rebecca by Daphne Du Maurier. I definitely recommend it highly. I think this was fantastic. It does have some shortcomings, like I say. Occasionally, our narrator was annoying. And some of the plot twists you could see a mile away. But despite that, great book. Excellent. Rebecca by Daphne Du Maurier. I highly recommend this one. It is fantastic. Okay, my friends, I will catch you next time here at Stately Fawn Manor.